Hi friends, in this video we're going to talk about implicit usings, top-level statements and file scope namespaces in .NET. Before C#10, if you wanted to print a simple hello world, you need to write this whole ceremony of code. But after C#10, this is a valid entry point for a console application. Well, how was this made possible? Well, it was possible due to three features: implicit usings, top-level statements and file scope namespaces. So implicit usings means some using statements are automatically added by the SDK in all the C# files even if you don't mention it. For example, the statement using system is not required to be written because the SDK adds using system in all the C# files of the project by default. So what all using statements would be added by the SDK automatically in all the files of the project? Well, it depends upon your project type. If you are building a simple .NET application which uses Microsoft .NET SDK, these usings will be automatically inserted by the SDK in all the C# files of the project. If you are building .NET Web Apps which use this SDK, along with these usings, these additional usings will also be inserted in all the C# files of the project. And if you are creating .NET Worker apps which use this SDK, along with these usings will also be inserted in all the C# files of the project. And if you are creating Windows Forms applications which use this SDK, along with these usings, these two usings will also be used in all C# files of the project. And that's why in C#10, you don't need to write using system explicitly, because due to implicit usings feature of C#10 and above, it's automatically added by the SDK while compilation. So that was implicit usings. So if you want to add more implicit usings in your project in addition to the default implicit usings, you can even do that in your CSproj file, and you need to create an item group in your CSproj file. And if you want to add a new using, you can use using include directive, something like this. And if you want to remove some of the default implicit usings, you can even do that using remove directive, something like this. Another way of adding more implicit usings in your C# application is through global usings. So anywhere in the project C# files, if you write something like global using mediator, it will be used in all the C# files of the project. So instead of adding implicit usings through the CSproj item group method, you can even add more implicit usings using this global using method. Generally, the practice is you will create a new file called globalusings.cs in a project, and you list all the additional implicit usings you want to include in a project. This way, all the global usings will be present in a single file. In fact, implicit usings is actually implemented using this global usings feature. You can't see that code, but while compilation, in the object folder, the global usings for the implicit usings can be seen. Now let's talk about another feature, which is top level statements. We have used implicit usings to remove the using system, but still there is this much code. How could we write just console.writeline hello world and it was a valid C# file? Well, that's because of top level statements. You can have one file in a project where you write the whole content of the static void args method without all this class and namespace and static void main method. While compiling the project, the SDK will identify this file as an entry point to the project because there is no class, there is no static void main method, and this is actually not correct to write a C# program. But if you have one file like this which executes something without even a function, .NET SDK will identify this as a file using top level statements. That means this file is the entry point of the .NET application. Just like only one static void main args method is allowed in a project, only one entry point file which uses top level statements is allowed in a project. Since it's the entry point file of the .NET application, you can just write console writeline hello world. It would be identified as the entry point of the .NET application and it will be executed. In the previous approach without top level statements, you had access to the args variable which contained the command line arguments. But how can you access the command line arguments in this approach? In the file which is the entry point of the .NET application, args is actually a keyword. So you can use args keyword for accessing the command line arguments in your project entry point C# file. In the previous approach without top level statements, if I wanted to write some async await code, I could have just declared this as an async method and I can await some actions here in this main method. How can I do this in the file with top level statements? Since it's a special file, you can write await directly and it is not wrong. Now let's talk about another feature, which is file scope namespaces. Before C#10, you have to write a class something like this. You need to mention a namespace, and in that namespace you can create a class. So the classes inside the namespace should come under this curly braces. That means every class you define will have by default at least one indentation. So all the code will have at least one indentation, and this reduces the readability of your classes. From C# 10, there is file scope namespaces. That means instead of creating the classes inside the curly braces of the namespace, you can just declare the namespace at the top of the file, something like this, and remove these curly braces, and now you can just declare the class below the namespace. Behind the scenes, the SDK will understand that since the class is declared below this namespace, this class belongs to this namespace. So if you use file scope namespaces, instead of declaring the classes inside the namespace curly braces, you can just declare the namespace at the top of the file, and you can declare classes below the namespace, and the SDK will understand that these classes belong to this namespace, my company, my project. So there are some rules to follow for using file scope namespaces. Only one file scope namespace is allowed in a C# file. Nested and multiple namespaces is not allowed. The namespace declaration should be immediately after the using statements at the top of the C# file. That means you declare all your usings at the top of the C# file, and then declare the file scope namespace, and then declare all your classes. So these are the things you need to remember while using file scope namespaces. And that's it. We have understood what is implicit usings, what is global usings, what is top level statements, and what is file scope namespaces. You can see I have created a blog post on implicit usings, top level statements, and file scope namespaces in .NET. The whole content of this video is present in this blog post, so please be sure to check out the link of this blog post in the description of this video. If you want to know more about how to use .NET, I've already made a playlist on that. I will leave the link of this playlist in the description. Please ask questions or post your valuable feedback in the comment section. Hope you like this video, guys. Thank you for watching. Peace.